Hello and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I am Kate Willett.
I'm Emil Torres.
And today we are joined by a very special guest, Adam Aleksic, who is the author of Algospeak. Some from the internet may know him as an etymology nerd. I think that is how I found your work. The first time I saw it was
Same.
you explaining skibbity. So I'm like, oh, wow, grandma's getting informed here. So welcome to the show. We're so excited to talk about your book.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So maybe we could start off with you just introducing yourself. How did you come to be known as etymology nerd? When did this all start?
I had a blog back in high school just for myself. I don't think anybody was reading it, called etymologynerd.com, and I'd do like a word a day. And then I studied linguistics in college, and then I was like, well, what do I do with a linguistics degree? So I started making videos about etymology under that same username, and that's how today I ended up as the etymology nerd. Eventually that led me into studying social media linguistics, particularly branching out into AI and algorithms and how they're affecting language. And that's my first book, Algospeak, on algorithms affecting language.
Absolutely fascinating. And what about linguistics drew you to the field? You know, there's a focus obviously on language, which, as I understand, you had a prior interest in, but also history, right? Understanding the etymology of terms requires some sense of history and, of course, the way that these words have evolved over time.
It's the way our minds work. The thing I like to tell people is that etymology comes from etymos, the Greek word for truth. So it's the study of truth. Literally, you find out something real about how we perceive the world and how we relate that to each other, because at the end of the day, that's what language is. It's the way we have of categorizing our reality.
Fascinating.
Can you say a little bit more about what Algospeak is? I mean, I just hear the term and I have my guess about what it means, but how do you define it?
Yeah, there's a surface level definition, and I think I'm trying to advocate for an expanded definition. The surface level definition is words used to evade algorithmic censorship. So because the word kill is suppressed on TikTok, some people say unalive instead, and now that's bleeding off into real life, and there's kids in middle schools writing essays about Hamlet contemplating unaliving himself.
Oh my God, I'm sorry, I can't.
It's beautiful. It's the next step in the English language, and we have to accept it.
Yeah, we need to outlaw grape. Yeah.
Debates on, whether this makes it easier to discuss certain topics or whether this kind of makes it harder to get at the core of what you're trying to say. It could go either way, right? But euphemisms have always played a part in how we discuss sensitive topics regardless, and censorship avoidance has always been a thing as well. But I think that kind of old understanding of algospeak is very surface level, because it's the easiest to point to of, algorithms are clearly affecting our language. But there's less visible stuff, the known unknowns that I think are more profound to me, that their algorithms create incentives for influencers to replicate certain words by pushing trends, and now influencers are trying to hop onto trends to go viral, and so they end up replicating this word to more people, which pushes it now and becomes more of a trend. And so now more influencers are going to say it, and that's sort of this positive feedback loop that we see. Algorithms also create these in-groups, echo chambers, filter bubbles, which now create communities with shared interests and shared need to invent new words.
Yeah.
And so all of this is kind of producing more language, and sort of there's a unique expressive direction to the language. At the end of the day, the algorithms are structured to commodify your data and sell you more ads. So they sort of structure the experience in this commodifiable direction, which means maybe our language is also evolving more as metadata rather than individual moments of connection.
Do you think that people have more words in their active vocabulary these days than in the past? So, for example, I know some people have sort of complained that if you read, for example, a scientific paper from 100 years ago or something, there's almost a kind of poetry that many of the scientists write with. There are sort of obscure, colorful terms that you don't see in writing today. But on the other hand, like the Oxford English Dictionary, the number of entries has increased very significantly, I think more or less exponentially over time. And so from another perspective, I want to respond to these people saying that, individuals today are less sort of well-spoken, less articulate than in the past. Well, actually, we have just a ton of new terms. Algospeak is a word that I didn't know about until fairly recently, and now it's part of my active vocabulary. So there are all these newer terms that we we use. And so, yeah, what do you think of that? Do you feel like our vocabulary is decreasing, or perhaps is it greater than it's ever been?
Since language is our way of capturing reality, it always kind of maintains homeostasis with what our reality is.
Mhm.
In the past, that we have a lot of studies showing that in the past we knew more specific words for types of trees, types of flowers, types of birds, all that kind of stuff. And now
Ah,
this language is declining because we have less of a need to interact with our natural environment, unfortunately. But we have more words for all these computer things. And
mhm.
I think it's a reality of human culture that we are spending more time online, and we have, I mean, previously, of course, in the 1850s, we didn't have any words for online things, and now we
Yeah.
have all that language. But that's part of our reality, and it's reductive to say that, oh, we're losing language or we're gaining language. It's always just what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I have just been very surprised when I talk to like younger people, like Gen Z, or with some of my friends' kids and Gen Alpha, like the way that they talk. I almost like, I think if I weren't on the internet a lot, I wouldn't even understand it. Like they have so many phrases, like they're like no cap, or well, and I guess yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about that example in particular. Some of these like common internet parlance are like getting pulled directly from AAVE, which is a whole other discussion. But even stuff like skibbity, I'm like, what is skibbity? Like I would truly have no idea if I wasn't online. And I think there's like kind of like bummer boomer take on this that like AI and all of these algorithms are just like making everyone dumber and reducing our complex thinking, but it sounds like you have a little bit of a different perspective, that
Well,
it's more nuanced.
yeah, I want to separate language from culture there. And
Yeah.
language is doing the thing that it's always been doing, and it's doing it perfectly, which it is a tool to describe our reality. That is what
Yeah.
language is, and we're using it great for that end. Now, the reality and whether it's good or bad, that is a subjective question. That's
Yeah.
the distinction between language and culture. And I think there are plenty of alarming things we could all agree are culturally kind of happening right now, like shortened attention spans, like declining literacy rates. These are definitely happening. But it's not actually the language that's the problem. And I think we have this tendency to ascribe words like brain rot to a word like skibbity, when in fact skibbity it just comes from scat singing, like the word Scooby Doo. You could consider
Yeah.
skibbity
Yeah.
related to Scooby Doo. We don't call Scooby Doo brain rot. So it's not actually, the word skibbity isn't doing anything bad to your brain, but it's associated with YouTube Shorts. And because we have all these negative aspersions about YouTube Shorts, we cast them onto the word. So I do want to make that distinction, and we should be talking about YouTube Shorts and how that's impacting culture. But linguistically, we're doing all right because yeah, the Gen Alpha kids have a need to categorize the word skibbity.
Yeah.
I think I am 20 years older than you, or so. I'm 43. And so can you explain 6-7 to us before I get to my question about Darwinian evolution, how that ties
Yeah.
into language?
Well, it's the question in everybody's minds right now. No, 6-7 is, I think we should be looking at it. It comes out
Yep.
of clip farming culture. So it starts with this song "Doot Doot" by Skrilla, and TikTok's culture is such that there will be music edits of people, and it started out with this song being combined with edits of the NBA player LaMelo Ball, who was 6'7", and so he was edited along with this song, and it would look really cool, and it would go viral. And then other NBA players they found out that they could also get edits made of them to that song if they said the word 6'7" on camera. So they got Shaq to say it, they got all these famous players to say it, and it became like a thing that if you said this, you knew you were going to get edited into a music video on TikTok.
Oh, okay.
Then Gen Alpha picks it up. Gen Alpha starts saying it on camera as well, and that's the important part, that it's on camera in hopes of going viral. And so there's always this implicit presence of the algorithm when 6'7" is uttered. It's this knowledge that you could be clipped. Clipping is like the way politicians would get sound bites in the past. Now we say things to get clip farmed. It's something like a shortened snippet that could go viral. And so to say 6'7" is to parody this idea with implicit self-awareness that you could go viral on the algorithm and get clipped in that way. So I think it's used nonsensically and absurdly right now, and people say it even when there isn't a camera watching. But it's playing into that absurdity, drawing the humor from the fact that it previously was used to go viral.
Fascinating. And so I guess tying into the issue that we were discussing just a moment ago, where there's this sense of like brain rot, and the vocabulary that individuals have today, the way that people speak, is in some way sort of lesser. it's inferior, and it's indicative of some kind of decline, right? And I'm curious if I'm correct about this, that there is an interesting parallel between biological evolution and the evolution of language, right? So there are a ton of qualifications to add to this, but one of the main insights, according to some historians, of Darwin's contribution from his everybody knows that the Origin of Species, 1859, was that there are no higher or lower species. Right. There is no telos towards which evolution is heading. In other words, evolution is not teleological, and that makes sort of the judgment of one organism being higher or lower than another arbitrary, right? And so, in the same sense, there are dialects and so on that are, like a Southern accent, for example, is coded as being less intelligent, right, than standard English, than posh accent, for example. And so, is that the right way to think about it? That there is no higher or lower language or dialect. They're all just, like you said, they're serving a function, and they're all doing that. They're all succeeding in that, which is to describe reality and to convey ideas from one person to another.
Right. A word does not have an innate purpose, but we tend to, as humans, have these ideas about how certain words or accents or dialects should be used. And that's where we get into that weird sociological stuff where you think some accents are better than other accents, or you think some words are like, oh, the word in the dictionary is better than the brain rot word. No, it isn't. In fact, I think the brain rot words are incredibly important in our society right now because they're giving us ways to categorize this tension with the algorithm. 6-7 is a way to categorize that feeling of anxiety, knowing that we are in a hyper-mediated reality. We're always being filmed and we could be clipped at any moment. Skibbity was kind of doing the same thing. Skibbity Toilet, the YouTube short series, comes from an animated series of a fictional camera-headed android battling a toilet. And you're a Gen Alpha iPad kid watching this on your iPad, watching this diegetically narrated through the lens of a camera who is often controlling another iPad in the series. And so it's a story told through multiple screens. And that speaks to the kids. Like, you have to ask yourself, why is this going viral? Why has this been viewed more times than the Apollo moon landing? It's because it speaks to their reality. And when you use it nonsensically, it is parroting that reality to absurdity in the same way that 6-7 is. And it's actually a valve release of this like tension. And if anything, if we stop thinking about it as brain rot and we look at it scientifically, analytically, we start to learn more about what's going on with our culture as a whole right now. And that's that truth part of the study of truth.
So I'm curious about this idea of slop. Like, how would you, I mean, that's a term that I think that we hear a lot these days, often associated with AI slop. Like, what makes something slop versus just participating in a trend? Is it a human person actually making it? Is it something else? Do you not believe it's slop at all? Are we all slop? Is this world slop? Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, that's a really crazy question because a slop is inherently subjective, right?
Yeah.
One person's slop is another man's treasure. But it all comes down to there are like a few universal qualities we agree that slop is, right? So we know that we have a negative feeling about slop. That's an important thing to start with.
Yeah.
Slop tends to be something intended for mass consumption, right? So, the hope is that as many people as possible will consume this. Kind of like, and slop is low effort, maybe. Think about the food you give to a pig. That is the origin point here.
Yeah,
It is
good
something
point.
that is, I like to think of slop as something that's optimized for a particular medium. So slop for a pig's food is just optimized for the medium of feeding these pigs as efficiently as possible. And you don't give care to what goes inside. And so that's that difference between the form, what it looks like, and the content, what's inside of it. And so slop is this form without content, where you're just feeding the pigs without, a Michelin-starred meal. Somebody put effort into that. Somebody put intentionality into making this as good as possible. But in another sense, maybe Michelin-starred meals are slop for rich people. There's this gradient of where do we decide intentionality exists. And my favorite artist, Stevie Wonder, feels less like slop than Taylor Swift, but both are incredibly successful musicians. It just feels like whether we're churning something out or not, whether we're doing something with intention, with this act of humanity, is when we feel like something is not slop.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that definition.
So I have a question about the role that technology, I mean, you touched on this already, the role that technology is playing in the emergence of new vocabularies, right? New linguistic trends. So, please correct me if I'm wrong about the following. So, my understanding of the history of, for example, the standardization of languages is that if you go back, in particular, again, correct me if I'm wrong, before the Peace of Westphalia, right, before Westphalian sovereignty, there, if you were to travel from north to south in Europe, right, there would be just a gradual uh, change, right, gradations, dialectical.
Same with vulgar Latin. Yeah, it was just a gradient. There was no like discrete language. Discrete language is this nationalistic idea inherently. I mean, just look at France in like 1800.
Yeah,
Even at the time, there was Occitan. There was like all these like different dialects inside it, and then French centralizes more, and they push out these minority dialects. And yeah, and language. The idea is inherently tied to the idea of a nation state.
right, absolutely. So you articulated much better than than I could have what I was trying to get at. So once you have this notion of a state with clear boundaries, right, then the state has an interest in standardizing languages within it. Otherwise, from north to south in Europe, there are just these gradations of dialects, and there are points maybe even within what we now consider to be countries where there might be people north who can understand individuals who are in the middle of the country. Those individuals in the middle of the country can understand people who are in the south of the country, but people from the north cannot understand people from the south. Again, drawing an analogy from biology, listeners can look up ring species, right? It's a very similar phenomenon. And so, with the formation of countries, you get standardization. Today, though, I guess part of my question then is, you have this like state interest in standardizing language. Today, you have these huge corporations that control the the algorithms of social media, and there is so much
They have the same
interaction.
interest. One of my favorite
Right?
books
Yeah.
is Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott. And like this is like the best book you can read to understand what algorithms are doing. And he wrote this about like governments back in the 90s. But yeah, there's this idea of like the state has this incentive to measure things because the more you can measure things, the more you can control them. The more you can, do a head count of these are all the people. Now you can tax the people. Oh, these are all the trees in the forest. Now you can get the right amount of trees out of the forest and do like lumber each year, whatever. But at some point, you miss the forest for the trees. There, you by just taking out trees, you're now forgetting the interrelated parts of what actually makes a forest, the animal ecosystem, the all this delicate balance that is required for. Thankfully, modern forestry has caught up, but the early experiments of state-run forestry like actually decimated forests. And in the same way, like all these great experiments to improve the human condition have actually kind of the cultural revolution, stuff like that has all kind of not done as well as they thought because they missed out on some other pieces of the puzzle, just measuring one aspect. I fear this is a lot of what algorithms are doing right now. These platforms are functioning like states. We are sort of in this techno-feudalist kind of society where we are the product, we consume the product, we make the product, and now the feudal lords, that being the platforms, are structuring things, measuring them. Every word is a data point to them. Every like they have all these like numbers on who we are, what we like consuming. At some point, though, you miss some aspect of what it means to be human whenever you measure something too closely.
I think that ties in really well to my next question for you. This show, for the most part, it's a pretty tech billionaire critical podcast. We talk a lot about everything from the ways that these new feudal lords, these, Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, like how they are shaping our political reality through money. Also, Emil's work is a lot about like their kind of long-term intentions that sound made up of like replacing all human beings with AI and transhumanism. I guess, thinking about this from the perspective of language, do you see any ways that these billionaires who own these platforms are shaping language to suit their political aims?
Yeah, I think we need to look at that distinction between teleological language and just regular language as is. One thing that's fascinating to me about transhumanism is that it comes out of Christian theology. It was this guy Pierre Desjardins, right? And he was theorizing about this omega point that there's this natural evolution of how humans have grown as a species, and we're going to reach this point. And this the whole like religious background is that things have an innate end, an innate purpose, and he believes the innate purpose of humanity is to self-evolve toward this singularity. That was an idea in the 1800s, and then it was picked up by early like computer scientists in the 1950s or whatever. That concept sort of drifts. So if you look at the genealogy of transhumanism, it starts with that idea that something has an innate end, which I kind of disagree with. I think things just are as they are, and then we ascribe meaning to them. But there's this idea of direction, of movement that sort of defines this tech ethos right now. That we are going towards singularity. We are like in all of our actions, we want to be agentic. We are doing something like the main character of a game, and that sort of defines the thought cycle of what's going on right now. Instead of just vibing like we could be.
Like, just as a quick follow-up to that, when you were speaking, I was thinking about the movie Mountainhead. I don't know, have you seen that one?
No, I haven't. What's in it?
I think it would be really interesting for you as somebody who studies language, because they did such a good job in this movie of capturing the very specific language these like billionaire tech bros are using. There's this meme that was going around, and it's Steve Carell, who is one of the main billionaires in the movie, and he says he's insulting one of his bro friends, and he says he's a D-cell with a crazy P-doom and zero risk tolerance. And I'm like so fucking mad that I know what that means. It's made me reevaluate my whole life. But,
I had listeners message me and say, thanks to the podcast. I know exactly what that means.
Yeah, I've got a crazy P-doom. Crazy. It's off the charts. But I'm wondering how you've seen, if at all, the proliferation of this kind of weird internal language that these terrestrial people that we talk about has developed online.
Yeah, it's funny because for all of our efforts to standardize language, the internet is sort of this space which is kind of like pre-Westphalia Germany. There is this gradient of how we speak in different linguistic subcommunities. When you get really deep into Swiftie or K-pop subculture, an outsider could not understand it. The same thing with the tech bros right now. And there's a lot of different influencers for where these kind of memes are coming from. Decel comes straight from incel vocabulary, which in and of itself is extremely insular. It's I did a chapter of my book on how incel languages reach the mainstream, like pilled maxing, sigma, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Decel is for a decelerationist, but it's like playing on that idea of cell as a suffix for like a loser character.
Yeah.
But if you're like really deep on those forums, like you can't recognize it. You're speaking a different language entirely.
Yeah.
And what else do we? NPC is a very common one. That kind of also comes out of those like weird 4chan spaces where it was this idea of people not as people but as like mindless drones going through existence. And that was used in like red pill arguments. Vote for Trump or you're an NPC normie or something like that. And so this sort of it is interesting to note the adjacency of all that Silicon Valley speak to manosphere culture and incel culture. And
really, why do you think that there might be some crossover there? I'm just joking. I know the answer.
No, of course.
Yeah.
No, it's also useful to note that some communities are a greater cultural emanators than other communities. There are nodes which push out more language to other groups, and sort of that space is one of them. You see a lot of rationalist language also in the Silicon Valley space. Coming out of those early blogs like Slate Star Codex or Less Wrong, and that sort of language is also really percolated into. So maybe I would characterize modern Silicon Valley speech as this combination of that and the manosphere language, perhaps, or maybe I'm missing some aspect of it. But there are those upstream nodes.
It's like two truly horrible influences, in my opinion. Look,
In another way, another upstream node was that guy Pierre Desjardins, who we should like all look at if we want to understand what's going on with Silicon Valley.
So now let Emil ask a question right after this, but when you're talking about rationalist language, can you give us like a couple examples of what that is?
Yeah,
I'm
did a
gonna
video on
regret
a while-
this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna regret it a lot.
I think we've like, most of us have heard this in some context. Words like non-zero or non-trivial or orthogonal. You say such that. You talk about
Oh.
subsets. Oh, what are your priors? Like it's sort of this like math
Updating?
CS.
Interesting. I've
Yeah,
never
yeah.
thought about that. I've never thought about those examples. Like, there's a non-zero chance. I've never thought about that as being like a rationalist thing.
Oh, it's language applying this like semantic domain of CS and math proofs into regular speech, and
Yeah.
you use these in context when you're not talking about CS or math. And the whole kind of rationalist philosophy is to examine the world through this like more logical lens, using sort of this Bayesian background that you have with that language. So while it's not purely because of that political or philosophical movement that people have started talking like that, it is a huge influence.
Makes sense. And is there any like how much have you heard about the post-rationalists? Is that a thing too? Has it gone on like another journey after that?
Well, I think somewhere around maybe 2019 or late 2010s, there was this offshoot where some people began to feel disillusioned with that idea that the rationalists had, that everything can be logically measured into buckets. And if you've picked up on it, I'm also very opposed to that idea. I don't think things could be rationally measured ever, because the world is this continuous, weird, intermingled, interwoven network of things, and not a thing that can be categorized into neat gradients. There are constantly new like movements and directions and fuzzy things rather than discrete things. So while rationalism relies on discrete logic, which will kind of reify some concepts, treat these concepts as like more real things than the actual things that exist. Post-rationalism takes a look at that through this less logical lens. And actually, that is a space that is also influencing its own, I almost said the word subset. I guess, subset of people in Silicon Valley. Right, so you have the word vibe is like going up so much. I mean, people are talking like vibe check 2019, vibe shift 2021, vibe coding this year. Like all these new vibe phrases are emerging. If you look at the trends for the word vibe, they're going up, especially in post-rat spaces. Other similar words like mood, energy, aura. I mean, the post-rationalists literally have vibe camps every year. So they're heavily into this idea of this aura, this ineffable ambient understanding of things, which I think is actually incredibly good to be looking at. Not everything can be neatly categorized, and you need to understand that some things are really about the vibes.
And I promise I will shut up right after this one thing, but I do want to say, just because it's like really striking me in terms of like the language that these communities are using, I also think that I've noticed like two other very prominent influences, which is just one, like the Bay Area New Age thing, like the kind of like hippie spirituality, manifest, abundance. And they've also mixed in, at times, I think a lot of the kind of like polyamory, sex positive community language from which I'm not trying to like insult that at all, but I don't want to hear it from Mark Andreessen. It's too gross, Yeah.
Yeah, it also isn't a gradient like a physical map. Like that. So the Westphalia analogy is kind of wrong. Again, maybe I'm ascribing something physical to something that's not. There's all these like small points of connection between different communities. I absolutely think New Age influence is playing a huge part. The rebirth of psychedelics and sort of this renewed interest in spirituality. The post-rationalist community is kind of more focused on those maybe than the rationalists were as well. So a lot of them are applying this former rationalist mode of thought to things that are not logical or discrete, like mysticism, like states of consciousness. And to be a post-rationalist is to accept that you don't actually know what a post-rationalist is. It's this weird, fuzzy definition as well, because all definitions are weird and fuzzy. So some New Age people are post-rat, some tech bro people are post-rat, and there's this weird all encapsulating sort of like definition for anybody who's sort of influenced by this mode of thought. I guess the rule of thumb is if you know what a post-rationalist is, you're probably a post-rationalist.
I'm not. I know what it is
if
now.
you're adjacent to it, it's hard to say that you're not.
I probably am adjacent to it because I lived in the Bay Area for a really long time, and I've been filled on some level with an all-consuming.
Even saying that we're adjacent to it is using rationalist language. It's
Yeah.
not something that we would have said in like the 80s, but it's sort of.
We gotta it's like there's like I know for me there's a desire to understand the specifics of why these people are so annoying. Like I don't want it to be just vibes. I want to really drill it down. You know?
Yeah, no, reasonable. I think there's that sort of tension. How much should we be categorizing things? And also, like, you look at our new media and how we engage with it, right? Things are more ambient than they were before. When you're scrolling on TikTok, you don't remember it was two videos above it. When you're listening to songs on Spotify, you don't know what song you're listening to. It's in the background while you're washing your dishes or something. And that means we have a less discrete experience of reality itself. Like, I know when I've read a book, I know when I've put a record on a record player, put the needle on the record and let it spin. I know exactly what book and music I listened to at that point in time.
Yeah.
But when we're consuming more ambiently in this sort of detached scroll state, our existence becomes more of this stream of consciousness thing, and maybe it's necessary to revert more to these words for ambient things. Also, it's important to consider that the technologies we're interacting with are also ineffable. When I'm making videos on TikTok, I don't actually know what the algorithm's rewarding. In 2017, if I were to post on the Reddit algorithm, I would have known exactly what that algorithm was. But now I don't. It's all neural networks, whatever. So I just have to feel out the direction of the algorithm. In other words, use my vibes. And when somebody's coding, they don't, with AI, like, they don't actually know what it's going to output. So you just have to go on a feeling. And so going on our feelings, we're reverting back to vibes at a time when it seems like the technologies are trying to impose gradients. And there's this huge tension. And which direction you realize it into is whether you become a rationalist or a post-rationalist.
This actually ties in perfectly with the question I wanted to ask. So you mentioned and then qualified the statement that we've, in a way, returned to pre-Westphalian Germany, right? You just have these gradations of dialects, et cetera. And so, but this gets at my confusion, which is the impetus for me asking you this question in the first place. Because on the one hand, it seems to me that we have, like, the nature of the evolution of language has changed, and it's sort of returned in a certain way with the advent of the World Wide Web, and especially social media. It seems like we've returned to that old mode of language evolving. But on the other hand, there is an immense concentration. There's a kind of bottleneck, right? Which is these algorithms. And this also ties into your point, as if I understood it correctly, about the teleological nature of the algorithms pushing language in certain directions. But you just mentioned a moment ago.
Oh, I'd love to go deeper into that. But sorry, where were you going to go?
Okay, fantastic, great. So you just mentioned that the algorithms today are AI, or they're based on neural nets, right? So my question, I guess my most burning question is it really teleological? Like, in the sense that there is some individual or group of individuals who are making a decision from the top down that this is the direction that language ought to evolve in, which I think is different from the people at the top saying this is what the algorithm should look like. But what is the algorithm actually selecting for? Well, it wants, it's the attention economy. It just wants you to pay attention for as long as possible so that they can make more money. Does that make sense?
So no person's actually critically making that decision of, I want this word to succeed or not. It's in the automated hands of these tools that we've entrusted to grab people's attention. So language is evolving not under a centralized authority like the Académie Française in France or whatever, which is also losing its grip on the French language. But it's evolving in this direction of what the machines are trained to reward. And so many rabbit holes to go down here. I want to back up briefly and mention why I think, this is a new paradigm, and kind of like what you were saying at the start of what you started saying. Language has gone through different bottlenecks at points in history. And I think the history of language is the history of the tools we have used to communicate, right? Before we had ways to write things down, we would rely on oral traditions to pass on stories. We had to tell our stories through rhyme and meter because that's how you remember them. And then we start writing things down, and which way you write things down is actually already affecting the story. So if you write it on bamboo, we developed all these curly scripts for languages that we're writing on like leaves. And if you're writing on like clay or stone, we develop more pointed, jagged scripts. So literally, again, we see language rerouting around the medium. And printing press comes out, and now you have all this ability to tell more stories. But now we have this ability to centralize, and language has to pass through these printing presses, which are sometimes controlled through all these like layers of consent, everything, and only certain types of stories end up really getting published. We moved to radio, TV. Now we're moving into audio and audio-visual mediums, and now the way we tell stories is again different. But it's still formalized in a way. There's still all these layers of kind of importance of who gets to talk. Internet is finally this chance for the written replication of informal speech. It is a huge paradigm shift because now anybody, regardless of their social status, can get online and say things. And we had sort of this birth in internet language starting from the early hacker culture, which still like language like noob is influenced by that. And then we get into this early 4chan space. It's anonymous. It's decentralized. That's influencing language hugely. Now I think algorithms are another inflection point, and I think they like the presence of algorithms in our society are as paramount to language as the introduction of the printing press. Like we're in this huge pivotal moment in the history of language where how we speak is controlled by those arbitrarily kind of incentivized neural networks that are choke pointing what words get distributed. They create incentives for influencers. When I'm feeling out that direction of the algorithm, I'm going to use words that I think are going to go more viral because the algorithm is sort of rewarding trends. It's like designed to reward trends. And whether or not that's teleological is that kind of point I wanted to circle back to. If there's no one person saying, right, this is the word that we're going to make word of the year or whatever, but it is a little of a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that if the algorithm sees the 6-7 song Doot Doot trending, it's going to push that song to more users because the job is to keep people on the app, and social fascination drives attention, which keeps people on the app. And so now you're going to push this song to more people. And so now influencers are going to notice this is a trending song, and they're going to make more edits of Doot Doot by Skrilla to different NBA players. And now people in real life start noticing, oh, wow, this is a trending meme. And they start kind of playing into it more themselves. And the more people that play into it, the more it becomes an actual trend, and the more the algorithm rewards it. And that's what I call the engagement treadmill, that we are in this sort of a positive feedback loop of words and ideas and concepts being perpetuated to the mainstream simply because the algorithm is rewarding what is maybe a latent cultural desire, amplifying that to a much broader audience, and then businesses, creators, real people start feeding into the algorithm because that's our job, and then it becomes more of a thing. So what is there an end there? Like what is the purpose? It's interesting.
What does all of the phenomena that you're describing mean for evaluations of the diversification versus the homogenization of language? Because I have read repeatedly that the number of languages in the world, just like if listeners aren't annoyed with all the analogies to biology, but biodiversity is declining very significantly, linguistic diversity is declining as well. I read one study. This would have been years ago, so maybe
I think it's every
outdated.
2 weeks a language dies out.
That is exactly what I was about to say. Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay, good to know that that's still accurate. And so at the same time, though, within and there's a qualification to add here in a moment, but within languages, there seems to be this radical diversification, right? All of these different dialects that are emerging. I struggle to understand Gen Z people speak, just as Kate was describing early on. So there's a diversification within languages, but a decline of the number of languages. And so, like, how does one make sense of this? And the qualification I was going to add before, it's just the obvious one, which concerns the distinction between a dialect and a language. And the
Right.
obvious,
That was
yeah,
exactly what I was going to say. What is that?
yeah,
That's made up. It's the same thing that we have declining nature words and we have a rise in internet words. Its language is this flexible, adaptive, amorphous, rhizomatic thing that continues expanding in new directions as our reality changes. And it sort of emerges as a way to reflect reality. And that's why I see words as like little bellwethers of where culture is going. But yeah, we are having actual languages die out, whatever a language is. It seems like that's true, but we have all these new internet dialects popping up. That is I mean, it was in place before the internet. This was going to happen because of globalization, because of centralization. Internet maybe is accelerating this, but in another way, there are language revitalization efforts on Discord servers, which are fantastic and would not have been possible without the advent of the internet. So there's I don't know. It's kind of questionable what the internet did. Something's definitely happening.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be a push-pull between homogenization and diversification, right? We have all these broad trends that unite us. Everybody has heard the 6-7 meme. Everybody saw, you know, well, I don't know if everybody saw Italian brain rot, but there's these broad trends that unite the internet in many ways, and in other ways, we get cyber balkanized into those like hyper segmented filter bubbles where we use different words, and that teapot post rationalist cannot understand like the Delulu K-pop stands, you know.
Cyber balkanization. I love that term. And part of so just to be clear, the loss of traditional like indigenous languages, for example, I find that to be very tragic. Right? We're
And
losing.
there's so much fantastic knowledge or different ways of seeing the world that are ingrained into those languages. I was just reading that essay from Braiding Sweetgrass on how there is a verb in Potawatomi to be a Saturday, and that's such a beautiful kind of way of visualizing, you know, the world in a different way than we just think of it as a noun, you know.
And so, before I finish my other thought, just since you brought this up, I'd love to ask you. So, my understanding, I mean, my background is in philosophy. So, I would argue that language does not constrain our thought. In fact, there is a fallacy called the Sapir-Whorf. Uh,
No, I'm not, you know, arguing in that direction at all.
yes, yeah, but it
Uh,
does open up or close down kind of inclinations. That's my sense. So, would you agree with that, or
Well, in fact, most thinking seems to be pre-linguistic. Like we have this snap judgment in our brains, and then we can verbalize it into words. But yeah, the inclination toward the judgment that we create, our vibe, our ambient evaluation of a situation, is determined by that which we see as possible or relevant. And so, while language does not determine reality, it influences our sense of what's going on, and then our sense of what's going on is going to affect how we behave. I think that's really hard to argue in another direction. It really shapes a lot of things. It has a literal constraint on the expressive possibilities. I can't kind of capture that verb form as easily in English of what it means to be a Saturday.
yeah, absolutely. So that's really interesting. I would say, introspecting, reflecting metacognitively on all of the processes that happen in my mind. I think I'm one of those people who thinks in a narrative, right?
Mm,
From the moment I wake up in the morning to the moment I fall asleep at night, there are just complete sentences going on in my head, and
fascinating. I
hence
don't understand you people. I'm mostly a head empty, no thoughts.
you're one of those people. I do not
Yeah.
understand what it's like to be you. It's so weird to me. So for
Wow.
me, then the vocabulary that I have available does influence the sort of thoughts that I have. But again, it doesn't like hard. It doesn't constrain in a hard way, but it does incline me to for example, when I was writing my last book, there were many occasions where I thought it would be really useful if there were a word in English to refer to the concept that I have right now. An idea that, for example, an idea that was prominent, influential in the first half of a century and then declined in the second half. Like there could be a word for that phenomenon. There isn't, right? And so it's just that language, the limitations of our language do sort of annoy me at times because it does influence the way that I think.
I have a single word tattooed on my body. It's the word Umwelt. Means the world as it is perceived by a particular organism, or in German it just means environment. But
Yeah.
that idea of the world as you perceive it being so influenced by Welt, your being in the world, you know what your understanding of reality is affects how you behave toward other people. And I feel like it's very important to think about when we think about that distinction between rationalists and post rationalists. The rationalist understanding of the world is that people and ideas can be treated as these abstract entities, and that like now that we've imposed these boxes, we can think more logically about things. The post-rationalist understanding is that there are no boxes, and that all of that is useless. So, completely different ways of seeing the world, which affect sort of directions that we might think.
So the thing I was going to mention before is just that, the loss of these languages, like indigenous languages, I think is really tragic. But what I'm really curious about is if there is, and that is a big if, that this is a conditional claim. If there is some way, some metric by which to measure the diversity of languages, I'm just curious over time if, despite these languages disappearing, if actually that diversity has maybe remained constant precisely because there have been all these cyber balkanized, kind of communities. That was sort of my interest, because maybe like just looking at the number of actual quote unquote languages gives a false impression.
Right, and you use that word metric again, the word that I have no idea, how to measure like anything about language. My undergrad work was in Serbian versus Croatian, and in Yugoslavia it was just called the Serbo-Croatian language, or it wasn't really thought of as separate languages in official textbooks and guidelines and communications. And then Serbia and Croatia break off, and now it's the Serbian language and the Croatian language, and there's a separate Serbian language institute and a Croatian language institute, and they treat the language differently, and there are different rules for how words get borrowed into the languages, and now they're moving in different directions again, because there's this famous quote that language is a dialect within an army and a navy.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true. Like I mean, Serbian and Croatian before were, I guess, dialects, and now they're languages. But you look at like Chinese, like Cantonese and Mandarin are called dialects, and they're they can be unintelligible. Versus like Spanish and Portuguese are definitely languages, even though there's actually more lexical similarity between them than between the Chinese dialects. So what's a dialect? What's a language? How do we measure diversity of a language? That like you're going to flatten it. You're going to miss the forest for the trees in that seeing like a state kind of way. My intuition is that because human conditions are in flux, language is as well. But if there is a less diverse human perspectives available, language itself is also going to be less diverse. And I think that's probably true due to centralization and globalization. Mm-hmm. No way I can back that up for you.
Fair enough. Absolutely fascinating.
In another way, there are a lot of new perspectives on the internet, but they are bottlenecked by the fact that they are on the internet, that they're often speaking English, stuff like that.
Well, so before we wrap up, I just have one final question for you. What are the up-and-coming communities that you think will be a big factor in our language in the next 2 to 5 years?
I mean, time and time again, it's the same old players. It's African American English, and it's the 4chan freaks, and that's like the two groups that have been defining Gen Z slang for the last 20 years. So there's maybe more emphasis on meme culture than in the past. This sort of clip farming community and online meme groups that created self incentives to come up with new niche memes. They're coming up with a lot of language. Hard to see how much of that would stick versus just be around as a transient fad. It seems like the stuff that's sticking is coming out of like the groups that I've already mentioned. But yeah, I think it's worth questioning, why are some of these groups seemingly greater cultural emanators than other groups? And I think the best answer is that language tends to follow these conduits of what is seen as funny or cool. And African American is seen as cool, and incel language is seen as funny, and so those spread. That's why we say things. We think they're funny or cool at the end of the day.
That's why I know what what's that word that they use for like when they work out their jaw? I used to know it. The incels, they do
Mewing?
like a thing with mewing. I was so mad when I learned about what that meant.
Right, that's another classic example.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find your work and learn more about all of these topics?
I'm etymology nerd online, but there's famously only so much you can do on short form media, so I like to recommend my book Algospeak.
I can't wait to read it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, the book is amazing. Thanks so much for joining us. I think your work is really brilliant, and I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you, likewise. I appreciate it.